Welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we look at these dropout strategies, people wanting to just exit the system, it usually comes in one of two flavors.
Right. It's either buy a bunker in New Zealand and hoard canned beans.
Or move all your assets to crypto and pray for a citadel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Both are basically just forms of running away.
But the source material we are diving into today, it's really different. It's a document titled the Interzone API. And what caught my attention right off the bat isn't that it wants to overthrow the government or, start a violent revolution.
No, not at all.
It wants to build a parallel society that sits right on top of the current one, but completely invisible.
Invisible and yet right under our noses.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a very, very strange image for you to picture.
It really does, because if you're listening to this, imagine the premise. You live in your city, you walk the same streets, you shop at the normal grocery store, but digitally, legally, and economically.
Yeah.
You are a ghost.
Completely off the radar. So help us frame this as we start. Is this just, a cyberpunk fantasy, some creative writing project, or is there actual engineering happening here?
Oh, it is surprisingly rigorous engineering.
Yeah.
I'm excited to unpack this with you because this isn't just a manifesto. It's a technical specification.
A literal API.
Exactly. It covers everything from the actual physics of radio waves and mesh networking all the way up to Supreme Court case law and supply chain logistics.
Wow.
But to understand why they built it this way, we have to start with the core philosophy. And it really begins with a concept called illegibility.
Illegibility. When I read that in the sources, I immediately thought of the political scientist James C. Scott.
You are spot on. The document explicitly cites Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed.
Right, the one about the highlands.
Yes. Scott studied the Zumia Highlanders in Southeast Asia, and he looked at how, for about 2,000 years, these communities managed to evade state capture. They evaded empires not by fighting massive wars, but by choosing terrain that was physically impossible to map.
The highland strategy. Basically, if the tax collector can't get his cart up the side of your mountain, he just can't tax you.
Precisely. Scott argues that the state relies on legibility. To rule you, the state first has to be able to measure you.
It needs a census.
Right, a census, a land registry, a permanent address. And the Highlanders deliberately countered this. For example, they grew root vegetables instead of grain.
Because grain grows above ground.
Exactly. Grain is visible. You can count it, you can seize it, you can tax it. But root vegetables stay hidden in the dirt until you dig them up.
So the Interzone API is essentially asking, what is the digital equivalent of a root vegetable?
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
Because how do you apply highland tactics when you live in a modern surveillance state? We're surrounded by cameras. We all have smartphones in our pockets. You can't exactly hide in a mountain range if you live in downtown Chicago.
And that is the central question of the entire document. The answer begins with what they call layer 1, which is communications. The directive is stay invisible.
Stay invisible.
And this is where the tech stack gets really interesting, because they are totally flipping the script on how we think about the internet.
Right, because if I'm trying to be invisible, the absolute worst thing I can do is use the standard internet. My ISP knows my physical location. The platforms track my identity. It is the literal definition of legible.
It's perfectly legible. So to counter that, they propose building dark infrastructure.
Dark infrastructure. They want to bypass the internet service providers entirely for local communication, right?
Correct. And the solution they point to is LoRa, long-range radio, specifically using the 915 megahertz band.
Wait, 915 megahertz, isn't that the ISM band, the really chaotic one?
Yes, the industrial, scientific, and medical band.
That's where, garage door openers and baby monitors live. It's incredibly loud and messy.
That is exactly why they use it. It represents the noise floor. The document suggests using devices like Meshtastic nodes.
I've seen those. They're what, maybe $25?
Yeah, super cheap little chips.
Mm-hmm.
And they send encrypted text messages that essentially just look like background static.
Ah, so they blend in.
Right. If you're the NSA, or even just a local police force trying to sweep for signals, you aren't looking for a low-power, methy signal. Finding a LoRa message is like trying to listen for a whisper in a room full of screaming people.
Okay, so we're talking about a mesh network. Everyone's $25 device acts as a relay for everyone else in the community.
Exactly.
But I have to push back on the practicality here. LoRa is incredibly slow. We are talking bytes of data, not megabytes. You definitely aren't streaming video on a garage door opener frequency.
No, definitely not.
And more importantly, mesh networks are notoriously fragile. If one node goes down or someone moves, the chain breaks.
And the authors of the Interzone acknowledge that. That is the main engineering bottleneck.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a functional, complex society if you can't reliably send data.
So how do they fix it?
To solve it, the document brings in some heavy hitters from internet history. They reference Vint Cerf.
Vint Cerf, the father of the internet.
The very same. But specifically, they look at his work at NASA and JPL on the interplanetary internet.
Okay, hold on. Why does a community trying to hide in a city need space protocols? That seems like a massive leap.
It sounds like a leap, but the physics problem is identical. Think about sending data from Earth to Mars.
Okay.
The planets are rotating. Large bodies like moons block the signal. You lose the connection constantly. You cannot use TCP/IP, the standard internet protocol we use every day, because it requires a constant handshake connection.
Right. If the connection drops, the data packet just dies.
Exactly. So for space, you need something that can handle massive, unpredictable delays. Cerf helped develop DTN, delay-tolerant networking.
So how does the Interzone apply a Mars protocol to Earth?
They use it to create a high-tech sneakernet.
A sneakernet. Explain that for the listener.
Let's say I need to send a really large file to you,
Yeah.
a blueprint, maybe a video file, across the city. But I refuse to use the public internet.
Because it's too legible.
Right. So I put the file on an encrypted microSD card. I walk it to a physical drop point. A courier, maybe someone on a bicycle, picks it up and physically moves it to your side of town.
Like an old school spy drop.
Exactly. But here is the genius part. The DTN software treats that physical movement of the SD card just like a data packet moving through a wire.
Wait, really? The network protocol doesn't care if the data is moving at the speed of light on a fiber optic cable or the speed of a guy on a bicycle.
It doesn't care at all. It's high latency, sure. It might take hours.
Yeah.
But it's infinite bandwidth. You can fill a backpack with terabytes of hard drives.
That is wild.
And because the data is effectively air-gapped during transport, it is incredibly secure from remote hacking. Plus, they combine this with IPFS.
The interplanetary file system.
Right. So data isn't stored on one central server that can be raided by the police. The files are shredded, encrypted, and distributed across hundreds of hard drives in the community.
Treating a guy on a bicycle as a network cable. That is fascinating. So layer 1 is all about talking without being overheard.
Yeah.
But layer 2 is where I think the strategy shifts from just being clever tech to something much deeper.
The legal layer.
Yes, layer 2 is labeled stay legal, which surprised me. Usually, dropout groups just want to ignore the law completely. But this document suggests actually using the law to hide.
This is what they call the private loophole. The goal here is to shift their entire economic activity away from public commerce and into private contract.
Walk us through that distinction. Why does that matter to the state?
Well, think about your daily life. Public commerce is you buying a coffee at a chain store. The state regulates that heavily. There are sales taxes, health department codes, anti-discrimination laws, business licensing.
Very legible.
Highly legible. But a private contract? That's you and me making an agreement in my living room.
Yeah.
The state has much, much less jurisdiction inside a private relationship.
Okay, so how do they scale a living room agreement to a whole community?
The vehicle they propose is the PMA, a private membership association.
Now, I have to ask, is that a legitimate legal structure? Because honestly, when I hear private membership association, it sounds a little bit like that sovereign citizen stuff you see on YouTube.
Where people shout at cops about maritime law and fringe on the flag.
Exactly. It sounds like pseudo-law.
I completely understand the skepticism. And to be clear, we are just reporting on their strategy here, not endorsing it. But the document grounds this in very legitimate, massive Supreme Court precedent. Specifically, NAACP v. Alabama from 1958.
That's a huge landmark civil rights case.
It is. In the 50s, the state of Alabama tried to force the NAACP to hand over its membership lists. The state wanted those lists so they could harass and target the civil rights workers.
Which was a common tactic of suppression.
Right. But the Supreme Court ruled against the state. They established that the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of association, meaning you have the fundamental right to associate privately, and the state cannot just snoop on who your members are without a massive compelling reason.
That is a fascinating pivot. They are taking established civil rights case law and repurposing it to shield a parallel tech economy.
Exactly. If everyone in the Interzone is a member of this private club, our trade with each other is classified as internal club matters, not public business.
It creates a legal black box. The state can see that the club exists, sure, but it can't legally peer inside to see who is trading what with whom.
It's a constitutional root vegetable.
I love that. But wait, That creates a totally new problem, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if we are operating purely inside this private club and you rip me off, let's say I pay you for some coding work and you just disappear, I can't exactly go to the public small claims court.
No, you can't.
I can't ask the state to enforce a contract in a system that is explicitly designed to hide from the state.
You've completely opted out of the public legal system.
Yeah.
So how do you enforce deals? That is where the document brings in Ian Grigg.
The financial cryptographer.
Yes. He invented something called the Ricardian contract.
I've heard the term in crypto circles. How is a Ricardian contract different from, say, a standard smart contract on Ethereum?
Well, a standard smart contract is just raw code. Human lawyers can't read it, and a traditional judge certainly won't respect it. But a traditional paper contract is just words on a page. Computers can't execute it automatically.
Right.
A Ricardian contract bridges that gap. It is a single document that contains both the readable legalese for humans and the cryptographic hash for the machine.
So it's basically self-executing law.
Exactly. If we have a contract for payment and the digital conditions of our deal are met, the code executes the payment automatically. You don't need a judge. The contract enforces itself.
What if the state tries to intervene anyway? Say they figure out who I am and they freeze my traditional bank account.
The document suggests that the Ricardian code would detect that failure and automatically reroute the community's value through other channels. It's a legal shield, but it's backed by unstopping code.
It really feels like they're taking Balaji Srinivasan's network state concept, the idea of organizing a community in the cloud first, and giving it a very gritty, concrete legal toolkit for the real world.
That's a great comparison.
But let's move to the practical day-to-day side. Layers 3 and 4. Identity and hardware.
Right, the trust layer.
Because if I'm in this interzone and I meet you on this chaotic radio mesh network, how do I know you aren't an undercover agent? Or even more simply, how do I know you're actually a competent plumber if I can't check your public Yelp reviews?
For that, they propose a combination of the Nostr protocol for communication and zero-knowledge proofs for identity.
Zero-knowledge proof, the ZKID. This is always a tricky concept to explain. I think a lot of people listening might struggle with the idea of how you can prove something without actually showing the proof.
It is counterintuitive. Think of it like a bartender checking your ID.
Okay.
Currently, when you hand over your driver's license to get a beer, the bartender sees your full name, your home address, your exact birth date, your height, your eye color.
They learn a ton of personal info.
Right. They learn everything about you just to verify one single Boolean fact. Are you over 21?
It's a massive data leak just to buy a drink.
Exactly. Now, a zero-knowledge proof is like a magical machine at the door. You insert your ID into the machine, and the machine just flashes a green light for, yes, over 21. The bartender sees the green light. He trusts the machine. He learns absolutely nothing else about you.
I see.
So in the interzone, you could generate a cryptographic proof that says, I have a community reputation score of 99, or I hold a certified electrician credential. And you prove that to me without ever revealing your real name or where you sleep at night.
So you can build a highly functional reputation economy without building a surveillance database. I can trust your credentials without needing to know your person.
Exactly. But to run all this cryptography, they have to address the hardware. Layer 4 is edge hardware. They want to completely get off the cloud.
Right, because if you are running this invisible society on AWS, Amazon can just pull the plug. Or the government can just subpoena Amazon.
Exactly. The document heavily cites the hacker George Hotz here.
The guy who unlocked the original iPhone.
Yes. Hotz has this philosophy which he applied at his self-driving car company, AI, that cheap consumer hardware is now powerful enough to replace institutional compute. You do not need a massive corporate data center anymore.
So what does the interzone use instead of a server farm?
The blueprint suggests using mini PCs. Things like the Jetson or a Nano, or honestly, even just leveraging the idle gaming rigs sitting in community members' bedrooms.
But wait, can a bunch of scattered gaming rigs really handle the complex logistics of an entire parallel community?
Individually, no. But collectively, yes. Do you remember SETI at home?
Oh, the screensaver from the 90s that searched for aliens? Yeah, I ran that on my desktop in college.
A lot of us did.
Right.
That used a platform called BOINC, created by David P. Anderson.
Right?
BOINC took a massive, impossible data problem, scanning the entire universe for radio signals, chopped it into tiny little pieces, and sent it out to thousands of idle home computers.
Right, distributed computing.
The interzone uses that exact same architecture. But instead of searching for aliens, they use the community's idle computer power to solve their internal logistics, calculating secure delivery routes for the sneakernet, allocating solar electricity, managing the private supply chain.
It's volunteer computing to run the economy. That is brilliant because it completely removes the central point of failure. There's literally no server farm for the state to bomb or raid.
Which naturally brings us to the economy itself, layer 5.
Yeah.
Because obviously this community isn't using US dollars.
No, if you use dollars, you have to use banks. And banks are the ultimate surveillance tool. They are completely legible.
Exactly.
So are they just using Bitcoin then?
Actually, they look a bit further back than Bitcoin. They point to the foundational work of Nick Szabo.
Nick Szabo.
Yes, long before Bitcoin in the late 90s, Szabo proposed BitGold. His core insight was this idea of unforgeable costliness. Value has to come from proof of work, not from a state decree.
But they aren't using a standard blockchain to track this value, are they? The document seemed really specific about avoiding traditional blockchains.
They are, because standard blockchains have transaction fees and latency. If I want to pay you 50 cents for carrying an Aziz card across town on your bicycle, I can't pay a $5 network transaction fee, and I can't wait 10 minutes for a block to confirm.
So what's the alternative?
They propose using a DAG, a directed acyclic graph.
For the listener, how is a DAG different from a blockchain?
Imagine a web instead of a single chain. In a blockchain, everyone in the world has to wait in a single line to get their transaction added to the next block. It's a bottleneck.
Right.
In a DAG, transactions can happen in parallel, branching out like a web. It allows for incredibly high-frequency, trustless trading of very small things like a few minutes of labor or a slice of compute power without the massive overhead of a global ledger.
It's a circular economy. The value is generated inside the community and it stays inside the community.
And that circular nature is the whole point. If the money never actually leaves the system to touch a traditional bank, the banks can't freeze it and the taxman can't see it.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most critical layer, defense. Layer 6. Because let's be real, if this actually works, if you have a community right inside a major city, generating wealth outside the tax system, ignoring regulations, encrypting all their communications, history strongly suggests the state will not be happy.
No, that is the Empire Strikes Back phase.
So what is the plan when the alphabet agencies show up? Are they stockpiling weapons? Because historically, compound mentalities that stockpile weapons end very poorly.
No, they aren't. And that's a critical distinction in this document. The Interzone's defense strategy relies heavily on Gene Sharp.
Gene Sharp, the author of From Dictatorship to Democracy.
Yes, he is essentially the modern godfather of nonviolent resistance. His strategies have been used in the Arab Spring in Eastern Europe.
So if they aren't violently fighting back, how did they survive a state crackdown or a raid?
The document calls it the porcupine strategy. You don't try to attack the predator. You just make yourself incredibly painful to digest.
How do they actually achieve that indigestibility in practice?
It's a three-pronged approach. First, they rely exclusively on dual-use technology. They aren't using military gear or illegal contraband. They're using gaming PCs, $25 hobbyist radios, and standard encrypted hard drives.
Right.
If the government wants to ban those components to stop the Interzone, they would effectively crash their own legitimate tech economy. You can't ban a graphics card without hurting your own society.
That's smart. It severely raises the economic cost of suppression.
Second is pure decentralization. And here the document draws on Yanir Bar-Yam's work on complex system science.
Okay, what does complex system science tell us about defense?
It shows that decentralized networks heal and adapt much faster than centralized hierarchies can damage them.
Because there's no headquarters to raid, no leader to arrest.
Exactly. If the police raid a house and arrest 10 people, the radio mesh network just automatically routes the data around that gap. The encrypted files are already replicated on 50 other hard drives. The system adapts instantly. A centralized bureaucratic police force is just too slow and too rigid to crush a distributed ghost.
Wow. And the third prong?
The legal layer we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Because the smart contracts are private and the entire association is shielded by First Amendment precedent, the state has a very hard time proving a public crime is even being committed.
Right, because it's just people exercising their constitutional right to privately associate and talk to each other.
Exactly. To completely crush the Interzone, the state would have to openly violate its own constitution and destroy its own tech sector in the process.
It's like trying to arrest the wind or, trying to ban math.
It creates an impossible dilemma for the state. Ignore us and we grow. Attack us and you break your own society.
It is an incredibly dense plan. When you look at the citations, Vint Cerf, James C. Scott, Gene Sharp, George Hertz, it's really a synthesis of the last 50 years of exit thinking. It's not just one cool idea, it's all of them stacked together into a machine.
It is.
But I have to ask, as an expert looking at this, is this actually feasible today? Or is it just a very sophisticated, live action role play for tech nerds?
I think questioning the day-to-day feasibility is totally fair, but it might actually be beside the point. The real takeaway here, the reason we're analyzing this, is that the Interzone API deeply challenges the modern definition of citizenship itself.
How so?
Well, for centuries, being a citizen meant being legible. You had a paper file somewhere, you had a tax ID, a physical location. You belonged to the land you stood on.
And this document says you can step off the map without ever leaving the territory.
Exactly. It argues that our technology has finally caught up to the ancient philosophy of the Highlanders. We used to think you had to physically move to a deserted island or build a cabin in the woods to be free of state control. But this API argues that with the right tech stack, encryption, mesh networks, private contracts, you can build a completely independent Mars colony right in the middle of Manhattan.
That is such a provocative image. You could be riding the subway tomorrow, standing right next to someone who is physically there, but digitally, legally, and economically, they are living in a completely different universe.
They're playing by a different set of rules entirely.
And you would never even know.
And you would never know. That is the whole point.
Yeah.
The ultimate success of this system is measured by its silence.
Well, that leaves us with a pretty heavy question to wrap up on for everyone listening. In a world where absolutely everything is tracked, traced, and put into a database, is true freedom about physically hiding out in the mountains? Or is it about building a system so complex, so illegible, that the state simply cannot see it?
It is the ultimate test of privacy in the modern age. Can you be free in a crowded room?
Thanks for diving deep with us today. It has certainly given me a lot to think about regarding what it actually means to be connected to society. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.